Let's talk about something called birthright citizenship. There's actually a way that you can take advantage of it. But if you're an American watching the political process unfold, you probably hear a lot of terms like anchor babies and chain migration, and you might not be sure exactly what they mean. You might not be sure even if you're a presidential candidate. Now, this is not a US political video. We're not going to get into whether birthright citizenship is good or bad. What I am going to tell you is it is hardly limited to the United States. It's based on a concept called jus soli. There's basically two ways that countries grant citizenship around the world. The first is this citizenship of the soil. You are born on the soil of a country, and therefore, for that reason, you are given citizenship. When I look at the paper that says I'm no longer a US citizen, it says US citizenship was initially granted based on birth in the United States. Even though both of my parents were American, that was irrelevant. Mattered first and foremost that I was born on the soil. That contrasts with countries where it's citizenship by blood, jus sanguinis, which is what most countries in Europe do, where if I just go to Italy and give birth to a child, or someone I'm with gives birth to a child, that child will not be Italian just because the child was born there. And so I came across an interesting conversation with Vivek Ramaswamy, who's running for president of the United States, who wants to end the concept of birthright citizenship. And something stood out to me.
You've talked about your mother's experience with the citizenship test. You've also talked about having something similar for folks who graduate high school in order to vote, having a civics test similar to what your mother took. Did your father also take the citizenship test, and is your father a citizen?
He did not, and that's a choice that he has made for familial reasons, but my mother did, and I think that every immigrant who comes to this country in order to become a full voting citizen has to do the same. And I believe in being consistent about my policies where...
So your father is not a citizen of the United States?
He's not.
Okay.
So the first thing that stands out to me in what Vivek is saying is his father didn't get US citizenship for familiar reasons. And this reminds me of Dr. Oz, who is dual Turkish American citizen. Dr. Oz ran for Senate last year and said, hey, if I win, I'll give up my Turkish citizenship, but I want to get it to take care of my mother. And I reacted to that and said, okay, but sure, being a citizen makes it easier to get in. There's maybe certain things you can do. It can be done more easily if you're taking care of a parent. India, where Vivek's parents are from, does not allow dual citizenship. If you get another citizenship and have to give up the Indian citizenship, you can get a card that basically gives you a lot of the same privileges to go back and live and work in India, but you cannot be a dual citizen. And so there may be some reason along those lines that his father didn't want to naturalize. Quite frankly, I see a lot of people around the world who don't naturalize, even though they have the ability to do so. If they've been living somewhere for 20 years, they qualified after 5 years, claim the citizenship before the opportunity gets away. But this is about birthright citizenship, so let's get back to it.
The citizenship test, was it before or after you were born?
After I was born.
After you were born. Okay.
After years of being in this, following the legal process of becoming a naturalized citizen. She followed it through the legal process.
And so you gained citizenship through birthright then?
Well, but you gained citizenship through birthright citizenship in that sense too.
So here's what Vivek is revealing. When he was born in Ohio, we were both born in Ohio around the same time, his father wasn't and still isn't a U.S. citizen. His mother had yet to be naturalized as a U.S. citizen. They were both in the country legally, and yet he gained citizenship not through any kind of blood, not that there's maybe such a American blood, but he got it based on birth on the U.S. soil. Again, same way I did, same way anyone who is American who's born there, that's the primary way you get it. However, and certainly he's not arguing people, born overseas should just be given U.S. citizenship. But if he were born somewhere else, obviously he wouldn't have been given American citizenship because neither of his parents had naturalized. If you have two American parents and you're born somewhere else, you can still be American. It's just not going to be based on, birth on the soil. And so, Vivek's argument in the campaign is, let's get rid of birthright citizenship. He goes on to clarify in this interview, hey, let's get rid of it people who aren't here legally. But that largely flies in the face with what most other countries do for birthright citizenship. Now, the U.S. can do whatever it wants, but let's talk about how this birthright citizenship works. Generally, diplomats are excluded, but Everyone else, pretty much, in most countries that have this, including anyone who's there illegally, are just granted it. And there was an idea in a number of these countries, not just the US, where it's like, it's just so much easier. Like, you're born here, here's your citizenship. And so, where does this exist? Well, it exists in most countries in the Americas, not just the United States. Canada has it. I sometimes wonder, I said, if I were the illegal aliens they talk about so much on the campaign trail, I get that the US is like an easier country to get into. But quite frankly, if I were someone who was flying in, why wouldn't you rather have a Canadian child than an American child? Quite frankly, that seems a lot better, not just for tax reasons, but geopolitical reasons, many other things. But you go south of the border, Mexico offers birthright citizenship. We had someone who worked here who gave birth to children in Mexico. Now, she's American, and so she was able to go to the embassy and file a consular report of birth abroad. And so now, my understanding is they live back in the United States. But those children are Mexican not only because of their father, but the primary reason is they were born in Mexico. And so if you look pretty much all over Central America, if you look over pretty much all of the Caribbean, we had a client once who was born in St. Kitts and Nevis. He didn't need to go through the citizenship by investment process. He got it by being born in St. Kitts and Nevis. And then again, his father was Kittian, but he got it because he was born on the soil. South America is the same. Chile had some restrictions. I wouldn't say that they're that restrictive. Colombia has probably the deepest restrictions, and then French Guiana, as kind of its own separate entity, is also off limits because Europe doesn't generally offer citizenship based on where you're born. I'll come back to that in a minute. But basically, every single country, with a few exceptions, in the Americas does this. You throw in a few countries in Africa, Pakistan, Fiji, those are the countries that grant citizenship. And again, it's pretty much whomever you are. The restrictions, for example, in Colombia are what Vivek is talking about bringing in. You have to have someone who's a permanent resident parent. You have to have like a real connection. But the rest of these countries, if you wanted to go to Mexico, for example, and you wanted to give birth, if you wanted to go to Brazil and give birth, we've talked about this for years, there's an opportunity for you to give your child dual citizenship at birth. And actually, the citizenship that you have at birth is strongest versus anything else that you can get. I don't think there's a huge difference, but I mean, there's certain benefits that like someone born in Brazil gets that someone who naturalizes in Brazil doesn't get. They may not be important to you, but you get a little bit extra. And it's a citizenship that really can't be taken away from you. Not that most people are losing their citizenship anywhere else, but if you are American or Canadian or Australian and you went to Brazil and you went to a hospital, you'd spend a lot less money giving birth. It's a lot cheaper there. They have some great facilities, but your child would be based on birthright Brazilian, and then you would go and apply for whatever citizenship you have. So that would be granted at birth as well. They'd still be, let's say, a natural born American, this thing that's been discussed in past years of is someone eligible to run for president? You can be a natural born American without being born on the soil. You can be a natural born American because you have American parents or an American parent who passes that on to you. You just have to go and file that report to claim both passports. And so that's an opportunity. Ireland was one of the last countries up until the turn of the century in Europe. It was the last country that granted this kind of unrestricted birthright citizenship. People could come and give birth in Ireland, and finally they followed with the rest of Europe. However, they are also in league somewhat with what Vivek wants to do, where if you've lived, not as an asylum seeker, not as a student, for I believe 4 years in Ireland, and you give birth, then your child can be Irish at birth. Latvia, a couple of years, opened up somewhat unrestricted birthright citizenship. And so these are just two different opinions. Now, obviously, there's people in the United States who say, well, we don't like that people just get to come here. Perhaps like Vivek, they would say if someone's here on a green card, but they've chosen not to naturalize, or perhaps they just got the green card and they don't qualify yet to naturalize. Hey, they're here legally. Should their children be American? Certainly there has to be some kind of system that, if you give birth to a child and you're from somewhere else, what's that child's legal status to stay with you? And that brings us to these things like, chain migration, for example, or anchor baby, these terms that are used politically. I'm not going to comment on the politics of it. But what people should know about the United States is just having a child that's born in the United States does not give you all the rights that people think it does. the concept of what people call chain migration is that when you have an adult in the family, they can bring other people in the same way that, let's say you move to Ireland and you get a residence permit, or you move to Singapore and you get a residence permit. You want to bring your spouse. There's a process for you to bring your spouse. You want to bring your children. There's a process to bring your children. And different countries have different levels. There's one uh, immigration program in Europe where you can bring 5 generations. You can bring grandparents, parents, yourself, your children, and your grandchildren. I'm not sure if anyone has 5 generations alive, but that's a form of quote unquote, chain migration where it's like, hey, if you invest money in our country, bring the whole family. There's certain citizenship by investment programs. Now, hey, you're contributing a healthy 6-figure sum to get that citizenship in a matter of months. But there's certain programs. Hey, if your parents are dependent, bring them over. If you have kids that are dependent, bring them over. We can all get citizenship, 3 generations together. Most countries allow people who are an adult to bring people who are in their family to varying degrees. Sometimes just an immediate family. Sometimes you can bring a parent based on certain conditions. Sometimes there's no conditions, but most countries allow this. So the big thing is birthright citizenship is not unique at all to the United States. Hey, every country can have a unique or not unique policy. That's up to their voters. But it was interesting to hear Vivek talk about this concept because, quite frankly, I think a lot of the Americans who are sympathetic and interested in candidates like Vivek and Trump and all these other guys who are saying, hey, the country's going in the wrong direction, should consider what countries are going to be more significant in that hemisphere in the next 20 years. And I think you can find countries. Mexico, I think, is moving in the right direction. The passport is a lot stronger than most Americans think. You can go to Canada, you can go to the UK, you can go to a lot of countries. Most countries an American can. As a Mexican, if I could give my child that backup, if I could find a country that was more conservative, if I'm politically conservative and I think the US is going the wrong direction, why wouldn't I give my child at birth? If I was planning to give birth to a child, why wouldn't I give them that opportunity? Hey, here's another country, and if things get bad here, you can go there. Sounds a lot easier. If you want to stay and fight, go ahead, but why not give them that opportunity? And so what we do here at Nomad Capitalist is help people who already have been born, and if you're watching this, I hope you've been born, figure out how to get a passport without having to go and be born somewhere else. And so if you go to nomadcapitalist.com, you'll learn about how we've helped people get citizenship in close to 3 dozen different countries. We help people with Caribbean citizenship by investment, where you get citizenship in a matter of months. We help people claim citizenship through their family tree. Maybe you have a parent or a grandparent or a great-grandparent who was from one of those countries in Europe. You can't just give birth to your child there and get citizenship generally, but if you have the ancestry, you can claim it and then you can pass it down to your children. Just helped a friend of mine get Italian citizenship for himself and all of his kids. And now those kids have the opportunity to be in the US or to go anywhere they want in the European Union, Italy or otherwise, for the rest of their lives. It's not because they were born there, it's because they had that connection. There are other ways to get citizenship. If you're in business, there's many different ways to get citizenship. To me, if you're watching and saying our country's going in the wrong direction, I want you to have a second citizenship, and I would argue a third citizenship too. But let's start with a second citizenship to where you have options. If it's a country like an EU member state, that gives you access to many different countries. Even the Caribbean gives you access to about 6 different countries. Give yourself and give your family more options. If you're planning on giving birth, there are countries that really don't frown on kids being born there and getting a passport the same way many in the US do. Look at that. But learn about your options. Nomad Capitalist helps successful people not only reduce their taxes if they want to leave their country, but even if they don't want to leave their country, have more options with things like second citizenship.